Hi everyone, Chrissy from Footprint here. Part 2 of Amelia Earhart. Looking at the flight itself until the time she's just after she's last heard from. So she took off from Lae at midnight Greenwich Mean Time, which is about GMT plus, where's GMT plus a GMT? About 6 p.m. in the evening. Was destined for Howland Island and never got there. Earhart used part of the around 3 p.m. Lae time, which would have been okay. Six, 12, 18, about 21 hours into the flight. Around 5 p.m. Okay, so at 3 p.m, about 21 hours into the flight, she reported her altitude at 10,000 feet, but that they would reduce altitude due to thick clouds. 2 hours later at 5 p.m, so that's 25 hours after she took off, Earhart reported her altitude at 7,000 feet and speed at 150 knots. Okay, and that was it. Okay, so let's have a look. I have got the map that I printed up for this, and there's a report that Fred may have been able to do some celestial navigation, so that Fred was using celestial navigation to determine their position. The plane would cross the international date line during the flight, and failing to account for the date line, that means they would have gone 6 hours back. Hang on, date line, it would have been, they would have gone into 6, I'm not even going to try and figure that out. I'm just working it off Lae time, so that's what they're saying the times are, the time in Lae. So 3 p.m. would have been 3 p.m. the next day if she took off at 6 p.m. the previous evening. So anyway, so did Fred Noonan use some celestial navigation? I'll just use a yes no card on that to see if Fred was using celestial navigation. I don't, that's a no card. I think he was quite anxious about conditions, but no, and that's a no as well. Seven of Cups. Oh, maybe, and maybe. Yeah, he might have. Yeah. So that's a no. That's a maybe. That's a maybe. So yeah, it's tending towards yes. He quite possibly could have been using some celestial navigation, but it was causing a bit of anxiety and a little bit of confusion. I think he would have preferred to use charts, but for some reason using a chart was not happening. So that's the first question I wanted to ask. So he was using some celestial navigation, but it's not really what he wanted to do. Anyway, so they're in the flight and they've taken off. And let's see. How did the first 6 hours go? So 6 p.m. lay time to midnight lay time. How did that first 6 hours go? We'll break it up into 6 hour 6 hour breaks. So from 6 p.m. to midnight, how did that flight go? It seemed to be going okay, smoothly, but this is the Knight of Cups, so I think there was something was not right, but they couldn't see it at that stage. Yeah, because the Knight of Cups is not always everything it represents to be. So the flight seemed to be going okay, but it wasn't really. This is a crossroads card. I think there was a point by which if they'd have picked up what was going wrong, they could have turned back and been all right. And that was sometime during that first 6 hours. They were still feeling really hopeful, really happy about getting to Howland Island. They were sharing stories, they were sharing us, they were sharing maybe hopes and wishes for the future, I guess. This is resources talking about how they were going to be, you know, talking about how they could use the money gained by this flight, I think. Sharing ideas. Given that they were still hopeful and still talking about the future and ways to use and distribute resources, did they have any idea that they were in trouble? No, they didn't. They thought that, in their judgment, everything was fine. They had not picked up on what had gone wrong. Yeah, so that first 6 hours seems to have been fine according to them, but something was wrong. And I'd say it would have been wrong since before they left. And they had time during that first 6 hours to turn back, but I think after that 6 hours wouldn't have been enough, you know, if they were any further than 6 hours out. But that doesn't really seem to make sense to me. So it might have been, we'll see what happens. If that comes up in the next, if the Two of Swords comes up in the next 6 hours, then no, if there was more chances to turn back. So they had a chance to turn back, and maybe some thought entered into their mind to turn back for some reason, but you know, I just can't see that if they were able to get 25 hours out, that they couldn't have turned back at after 6 hours. They wouldn't have been at the go no go line. So let's see if that Two of Swords or another two comes up. So 12 midnight lay time to 6 a.m. in the morning. What was going on? Charging. They were still like quite happy to keep going forward, charging forward. They didn't have any doubts. Ace of Swords, they didn't have any doubts that they'd be able to get to where they were going. But at some stage they did an assessment, and I don't think this would be as silly as it seemed. I would think on a flight like that in those days you assess the situation every couple of hours. So they did an assessment. But they kept going. So I think there was another point where they could have turned back. I'm just going to, with these two, another point where they could have turned back. Page of Cups, yes. So that assessment was another time where they could have turned back in those 12 hours, the second 6 hours. So, but they chose to keep going. I wonder if that would have been nearing the 12-hour mark, nearing the go, no go. Because once they chose to keep going, they were out in the cold. Okay, so that is 12 midnight on July the 3rd, Lae time. That's Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Oh, no, not Daylight Saving, it's Australian Standard Daylight Time. To 6 a.m. on the 3rd of July. So 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. on the 3rd of July. Let's have a look at that. The thing that happened, that passed through my mind, is abundance. Things started piling up. They were looking at things with a different perspective, but I don't think they were still panicking. This person's perfectly calm, hanging upside down. They were, dealing with lots of things. Each one of these ones was something that popped up, and, there's Amelia and Fred. They're both probably starting to feel a bit battle weary by now. But despite all that, they still felt that they would be able to get to Howland. They were still quite happy and still very positive and optimistic about the flight. I would imagine that, I'm not an expert in aviation from that era, but I would imagine that, that's why they assess things every few hours, because things can go wrong. You're in this tiny little thing that rattles and hums and just keeps going and going, and things knock here and things knock there, and they probably had a lot that, it seemed to me that they were very busy just dealing with things during that 6 hour period. Now, we're into the last segment. So this is the third 6 hour period, and I'm going to extend this to 7 hours because at 3 p.m. they were heard from, saying they were at 10,000 feet and going down, and then again at 5 p.m. they were heard from. So things had started to heat up. They had an abundance of things just they were having to deal with and everything, and yeah, but they were still optimistic. They still felt they could deal with everything. I'm going to ask a question. They were definitely past the go, no go point by this time. So there was no turning back. If they'd have turned back at that time, they would have just, still would have gone down. So let's see. So the last 7 hours. I'll probably add some more cards onto this, do more than 4. We'll probably do a couple of layers to see if we can get into things a little bit deeper. So the last 7 hours, 12 p.m. on the 3rd of July, Australian time, to 5 p.m. on the 3rd of July. What's going on? They did another assessment, the card of assessment. Wasn't very happy news during this time. This is when I think it started to sink into them that, you know, things were like not necessarily the best. But they were still hopeful. I think this would have been before 3 p.m. So during that time, between 12 p.m. and 3 p.m, they did an assessment. It wasn't exactly the best news, but they were still hopeful. You know, they still had faith that they could make it. This is faith in this instance, not foolhardiness. This is faith that they could make it. And at 3 p.m. they said they were going lower. So they started descending, right? Yeah, they were still standing their ground, still determined to get there. So, second layer. This is from like 3 p.m. on. They were hanging in there, doing everything they could. They were starting to feel increasingly isolated. Maybe starting to think, we might not make it. This is, you know, are we going to get away with this? This is like, they're still trying to gather everything together. But, like, gather all their resources, get everything together. They're gathering everything here, so maybe they're starting to think, we might not make it, so we better make sure we have everything we need to survive if we go down. I think they were starting to think that maybe they weren't, but I don't know why they didn't send out a call if that was the case. Oh, after 3 p.m. to 5, things just happened really, really quickly. Yeah. So that's 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. as they were hanging in there, but starting to feel more isolated, starting to gather things together because they thought, geez, we might not pull this off. And then stuff just started happening so quickly after 5 p.m. So I'm going to have a look at after 5 p.m. We'll make it 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Okay. They tried to deal with everything that came along. They tried to maintain balance in the plane and tried to keep things going and worked really hard. They looked for every opportunity they could to land. This is coins is representative of Earth. You know, in some packs it's represented as Earth. That they looked for every opportunity. They looked for news of every piece of land that they could possibly land on. Remember I said that something was hidden? Basically a spy in a camp. At the start with the Knight of Wands, that's when it all went to, yeah, he came out of hiding. The whatever went wrong came out of, you know, whatever was causing the trouble came out of hiding and showed itself big time. I was still hoping for victory. Look, I don't think they ever stopped fighting. They were prepared to go down, but I think they just kept going till the end. I'm going to ask a yes/no question here. On the bottom, they maintained their equilibrium. They maintained their, you know, they were scared, but they knew that freaking out wouldn't help. Was it between this time frame, 5 p.m. and 8 p.m, that they went down? Yes. They knew they had to get themselves on solid ground, and the plane was going down, and that's a yes. Yeah. They were still looking, still searching. They never stopped looking. I think they almost got there. I think they almost got to land. There was talk about that island where choosing. I think they almost got there. They may have just landed offshore. So I think they almost got there. They almost got to land, and then there's the Earth again. I think, yeah. I think they crashed just offshore and were able to get to shore and thought, okay, we've got a few things, we just have to wait this out. We'll be okay. So yeah, that is... I'm not a mechanic, so I didn't ask what went wrong. All I can see is that they couldn't see it. It was hidden until it suddenly and sort of brought everything together. So that's the flight. They almost made it to land. Plane didn't. They did that. They did. This says they did. But the plane didn't quite get there. So they were close enough to be able to get out and get themselves to shore somewhere. So they did. Yeah, so anyway, that is my reading on the flight itself. It turned into 26 hours from, from 6 p.m. Lae time to 8 p.m. the following day. 26 hours. Yeah, so look, next I'm going to ask a couple of questions of how long were they where they were before they perished, and have a look at what happened between them crashing and getting to land and perishing. And then I'm going to start looking at asking questions. So I'll probably do that in the same reading. I'll start asking some questions there. So anyway, thank you very much for joining me. I love you all, Footprinters, and I will see you at the next reading. Bye bye.